Okay, so you know that feeling when someone's maybe dissecting an idea and you're listening thinking, are they trying to help here or are they just finding fault?
Yeah, or maybe you've caught yourself doing it, right? Focusing on the problems instead of the potential.
Exactly. It's such a common thing, this like blurry line between what we call critical thinking and just plain being critical of people. And honestly, figuring out that difference, it feels like unlocking a bit of a superpower for communication and actually learning stuff.
Absolutely. And that's exactly what we want to dig into today. We've got some really interesting source material here, different viewpoints, practical examples, even a handout designed for like classroom use to help clarify this.
Okay.
So our mission really for this deep dive is to give you a really solid handle on what each term means and maybe more importantly, how you can use critical thinking constructively, build things up, not tear them down.
Right. Because this isn't just like academic theory. Getting this difference really helps you in everyday life.
Yeah.
You'll be better at handling tricky conversations. You'll be able to sort of sift through all the information you see online more effectively and, build stronger relationships because you're focused on the ideas, not making it personal, which, let's face it, nobody likes being on the receiving end of that.
Definitely not.
So yeah, let's get started. What exactly are we talking about when we say critical thinking?
Okay, yeah, let's unpack that. Looking across the sources we have, there's a pretty consistent definition. Critical thinking is basically an objective, analytical process.
Objective.
Yeah. It's about looking at ideas, arguments, or information logically, systematically. One source really stresses logical reasoning, checking the evidence, spotting biases, while another, the classroom handout, calls it an objective, logical evaluation of ideas, arguments, and evidence. Pretty similar.
Yeah.
And even one aimed at like junior college students talks about it being a reasoned, reflective process, thinking carefully about ideas to make informed judgments.
So it sounds like it's much less about your gut feeling or your personal opinion and more about the substance of the argument itself.
That's it exactly. And the sources really highlight the key traits. Logical reasoning is huge.
Okay.
It means looking carefully at the evidence someone presents, seeing if there are any, flaws in their logic or maybe hidden biases, and then drawing conclusions that the facts actually support.
Like checking the work almost.
Kind of, yeah. For instance, one source mentions, like, if you're listening to a political debate, a critical thinker wouldn't just pick a side. They'd look at the facts being used, check for logical fallacies, and think about, well, what are the counter-arguments?
Gotcha. So really examining it, not just reacting. What else makes up critical thinking?
Asking good questions. That's absolutely essential. It's about challenging assumptions. Not just the other person's assumptions, but yours, too.
Ooh, that's interesting.
Yeah. Seeking clarity if something's unclear, and really trying to explore different viewpoints. One source hammers this home, and another gives great examples like asking, what's the actual evidence for this claim? Or how might someone with a totally different background see this?
Right.
And another source adds questions like, what could be the source's bias or agenda here? Or are there other ways to explain this?
So you're really trying to get underneath the surface, not just accept things as they're presented.
Exactly right. And that naturally connects to problem solving, which one source mentions sort of breaking down big, messy issues into smaller parts so you can understand them better.
Makes sense.
And another really big piece is open-mindedness.
Okay.
A critical thinker has to be willing to change their mind if new, strong evidence comes along. One source points this out, and another says explicitly that critical thinking, quote, invites alternative perspectives and is willing to revise conclusions.
That's sometimes the hardest part, isn't it? Admitting you might need to adjust your view.
It really can be, but it's fundamental. And this is where it gets really clear how different it is from just being critical. Several sources specifically point out what critical thinking isn't.
Okay, like what?
Well, it focuses on the ideas and the evidence, not on the person presenting them. That's stated clearly in a couple of places.
Right, the substance, not the speaker.
Exactly. And its goal, its purpose, is to find truth or to improve something. It's not about making someone feel bad or diminishing them. Several sources stress this point. It even means questioning your own core beliefs. One source poses the question, could I be wrong about this? Which is, wow, such a key part of genuine critical thinking.
Yeah.
And ultimately, as another source summarizes, it's all based on logic and evidence, it stays open to being revised, and the driving force is wanting to understand things more deeply.
Okay, wow. So critical thinking sounds like a really powerful toolkit for your brain.
Okay.
What are the actual upsides, the benefits of developing it?
Well, the sources list quite a few. One highlights making better decisions, sparking innovation, and improving teamwork, collaboration.
All good things.
Definitely. Another source adds that it sharpens your judgment, encourages respectful debate, which we could always use more of, and leads to better outcomes overall.
Yeah.
And a third source really drives it home, saying it promotes respectful disagreement, leads to healthier discussions, and actually builds stronger relationships in school, work, socially, and helps us avoid pointless conflict.
Okay, I'm sold on critical thinking. So now let's flip the coin. What about the other side? What does it really mean to be critical of people?
Right. This is a completely different beast. One source defines it plainly as negative interpersonal behavior. The focus is on judging, blaming, or finding fault in other people.
Okay, so the focus shifts from the idea to the person.
Exactly. The classroom handout we looked at calls it judging or blaming individuals negatively, often in a personal or emotional way.
Emotional, okay.
Yeah, and the definition for junior college students talks about focusing on someone's flaws or shortcomings judgmentally negatively.
And so it sounds much more personal, much less objective.
That's the core of it. And the traits listed really bear that out. One source talks about personal attacks going after someone's character, their appearance, maybe questioning their motives. They give a pretty harsh example. You're so careless and incompetent.
Yeah, that's personal.
Definitely. Also, making harsh judgments, like assuming someone meant to do something wrong without any proof, and just tearing someone down without offering any constructive way forward, no help, just criticism.
Right. Not helpful at all.
And a big factor is emotional bias. Letting how you feel about a person color your judgment unfairly.
That sounds, well, pretty destructive, actually.
It really is, and the sources spell out why. One points out this type of criticism zeroes in on the person, not their ideas, and it's often fueled by emotion, judgment, blame. It actively blocks any kind of constructive conversation. And as one source notes, it can really damage relationships and a person's self-esteem.
Yeah, I could see that.
Another source adds that it's subjective just based on personal feelings, not facts, and inherently judgmental, focusing on flaws and mistakes. It tends to be negative and erodes trust, respect, and dialogue.
So it just shuts things down.
Pretty much. That source even gives a direct contrast.
Right.
Instead of pointing out a lack of evidence in an argument, someone being critical might just snap, "You clearly don't know what you're talking about."
Wow.
Another source gives the example, "That's a dumb opinion." And a third one offers the really nasty, "Only an idiot would believe that."
Yikes. Okay, those examples really highlight the difference in, tone and intention. It's stark.
It really is. And the fallout from this kind of behavior is significant. One source states clearly it creates conflict, it stifles communication, it damages relationships, period. Another echoes that, saying it shuts down conversation, makes people defensive. A third notes it can cause resentment, shame, or make people just completely check out.
Yeah, disengage.
Exactly. And a fourth just summarizes the likely results as either conflict or withdrawal. Neither is good.
Okay, so we've got critical thinking over here, analytical, objective, focused on ideas, aiming for improvement, and being critical of people over their personal, emotional, judgmental, focused on flaws. How can we really nail down the key differences?
This is where those comparison tables in a couple of the sources are super helpful.
Huh.
They lay it out really clearly across a few dimensions: target, goal, tone, and outcome.
Right.
So with critical thinking, the target is the idea, the argument, the evidence. With being critical of people, the target is the individual person, their character, their flaws.
That's a big difference.
Huge. Then the goal. Critical thinking aims for deeper understanding, for improvement, for finding truth, being critical. The goal is often just expressing disapproval, blaming, judging. The tone. Critical thinking should be questioning, respectful, analytical. Being critical is often harsh, personal, emotional, maybe even sarcastic.
Yeah.
And finally, the outcome. Critical thinking ideally leads to better understanding, stronger ideas, collaboration. Being critical usually leads to conflict, hurt feelings, defensiveness, breakdown of communication.
Seeing it broken down like that, target, goal, tone, outcome, it makes the contrast incredibly clear.
It really does. And one source has this great key difference summary that just nails it. Critical thinking analyzes ideas and arguments. It's objective, logical, seeks truth and improvement, encourages growth.
Okay.
Being critical of people attacks people. It's often emotional, personal, focuses on blame and fault-finding, and can be really demoralizing.
Got it.
Other sources echo this, talking about the difference in the purpose understanding versus disapproval, the focus ideas versus people, and the whole tone and result collaboration versus conflict.
Okay, crystal clear now on the what and the why. They're different. But what about when you do see a real problem, like something genuinely needs to be pointed out? How do you do that without just falling to being critical of the person? How do you give, like, constructive criticism?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Because sometimes you do need to address issues.
Right.
And the sources offer some really practical tips here. The number one thing seems to be focus on the specific behavior or the outcome, not the person's character.
Okay, behavior, not character.
Exactly. One source gives a great example. Instead of, you messed this up, try something like, this approach didn't quite work as expected here.
Oh, much softer.
Yeah. Another suggests, instead of, you're bad at explaining things, maybe try, this part of the explanation could be a bit clearer for the audience. And a third source just reinforces that. Focus on the actions, not assumptions about their personality.
That simple change in wording probably makes a massive difference in how it lands.
Right. A huge difference. Another key piece of advice from several sources is offer solutions or suggestions if you can.
So don't just point out the problem.
Right. Don't just identify the issue. Try to contribute to finding a way forward. Be part of the solution. And empathy comes up, too, in a couple of sources.
But empathy, how so?
Well, trying to understand the other person's situation, their context, why might they have done things that way? One source specifically says to speak with empathy and respect.
So trying to put yourself in their shoes a bit before you speak.
Exactly. And fundamentally, constructive feedback should actually use critical thinking.
Brings it full circle.
Yeah. Base your feedback on evidence and logic, like a few sources say. And one source adds, be specific. Don't make vague general complaints. Pinpoint the issue.
Right. Specificity helps.
Definitely. And finally, another source suggests using I statements. You know, I found this part confusing rather than you made this confusing, or I think we could try instead of you always do it wrong.
Okay, those are all really concrete things you can actually do. Focus on behavior, offer solutions, be empathetic, use evidence, be specific, use I statements. Got it. So let's pull it all together. Why does really getting this distinction matter so much in our, day-to-day lives?
Well, going back to what we said earlier, one source reminds us that critical thinking is the engine for better decisions, for innovation, for working well together. And on the flip side, being overly critical of people just wrecks relationships and shuts down communication. Multiple sources agree on that.
Yeah.
One source ties it directly to everyday stuff, saying understanding this difference improves how we talk to each other, how we work in teams, how we handle academic discussions, even how we interact online.
Which is huge these days.
Absolutely. It makes space for respectful disagreement, encourages actual healthy discussion, and that builds stronger bonds, whether you're learning together or just living life together. And ultimately, it helps us dodge unnecessary fights.
So it's really not just about being smarter. It's about being better at interacting with other human beings, building things together instead of apart.
That's a great way to put it. Exactly.
This has been incredibly clarifying, really helpful. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's maybe one final thought you want to leave everyone mulling over?
I think it kind of boils down to this. Critical thinking is this amazing, powerful tool we have for figuring out the world, the information we get, the problems we face. It's about objective evaluation.
Right.
Being critical of other people, though, often that says more about us, maybe our own frustrations, our biases, our insecurities, than it does about the person we're judging. It's usually not about objective truth.
That's a challenging thought.
It is. Yeah. So maybe just take a moment to reflect. Which mode do you tend to operate in more often? Critical thinking about ideas or being critical of people? And what effect does that approach actually have on your relationships, on your learning, on your own well-being?
So the challenge is to be conscious, to choose critical thinking, to aim for constructive feedback when needed, and hopefully build more positive, productive interactions all around. Use our minds to build up, not tear down, as one source put it.
Exactly. Well said.
Thanks so much for digging into this with us today. Really valuable stuff.